Good afternoon and welcome everybody. I'd like to call to order the September meeting of the Board of Early Education and Care. First, want to just wish everybody a happy fall as we enter this time of year, and hope everybody had a great season, and to all of our providers out there who just went through some transitions with kids, wishing you all the best and thinking of you this time of year as well. Today we come back together as a board to set the stage for the work ahead this fiscal year. We'll take a few minutes to reflect on our board retreat that was held in August, and we will also receive an update on child care financial assistance reform and review C3 survey findings. We will also welcome some guest speakers today who are leading work to look at the economics of the child care system as we continue to challenge ourselves to look at the most effective financing mechanisms to support the field. So I want to thank you all for being here, and with that I will turn it to Secretary Tutwiler for comments.
Good afternoon. I think I'll start by echoing your sentiments around happy fall to all, and hope you had a restful summer or found a way to enjoy some respite. Lucky enough to be present at the retreat a few weeks ago, although it feels like last week, maybe that's just me, with many people who are in the room now, and just, I know it's on the agenda, but just wanted to lift up again what a wonderful event that was, an opportunity to connect and collaborate, and looking forward to debriefing a little bit later in the meeting. This year already has the markings to be impactful across early education and care, especially due to the historic early education investments that Governor Healy signed into law with the FY24 state budget. I know we'll dive a little bit deeper later in the meeting, but there's just a couple of wins that I want to quickly call out. One first that's been appropriately celebrated is the $475 million for C3 grants, but also want to name the $25 million to provide greater access for families on our Waitlist, over $20 million to continue to build out the Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative. And this budget will also deliver an additional $45 million in rate increases while maintaining the $80 million from FY23. These funds together add up to the highest dollar investment in this level of education in our Commonwealth's history. And I, for one, couldn't be more excited to put these dollars to work, expanding access and affordabilities for families while continuing to stabilize the sector. Today, we, as is noted on the agenda, will have an opportunity to hear more about the important changes the department's making to the child care financial assistance regulations. I just want to quickly express my appreciation to the commissioner and her staff for engaging in a really intentional stakeholder input process. And just note that these regulations are much better because of your hard work and the input that you collected. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for your leadership in lifting up the historic budget that the department has this year.
From the administration and from the legislature, and we look forward to digging into that a little bit, and also with the support of and engagement of this board, and we'll hear a little bit about that from the retreat. I just have a couple quick updates before we dive into the agenda. The first is around holiday closure. So for the past several years, and again this year, we are pleased to be able to offer the option for our programs participating in child care financial assistance programs, the option to close during the week between Christmas and New Year's without fear of penalty of funding. So we will pay for those days if programs choose to close. We don't direct programs to close, but we are giving that option. It is a difficult time in the early education and care field, and we know that our staff and program directors are stressed, and their families need rest and time together during the holidays. And this is an option that we can make available. And this year we're announcing it as early as possible so that programs can plan in collaboration with parents to make sure that there's coverage arrangement should a program decide to close and a family need that coverage during that week. So we're happy to be able to make that announcement. The other is, as board members are aware, and many of our stakeholders, we have been in a process as part of our child care financial assistance work of getting ready to reprocure our contracts for child care financial assistance. They have not been reprocured in 13 years. So we are long overdue to get those done, and we had initially planned to post a request for proposal this fall with new contracts starting in January, and in collaboration with our partners and many of folks in the field have asked that we delay that a short time because it has been so long, and the fall is a very busy time for programs, making transitions of kids into school, into preschool, into new classrooms, and also with the implementation of the new child care financial assistance regulations and policy. It's going to be a very busy time, and folks asked if we could just take a small delay, and I'm happy to say that we did get approval from the Operational Services Division to delay that for 6 months. So we are anticipating a request for proposals going out in late winter, with new contracts starting July 1st. So just a short delay, but I think one that will give both the agency as well as our partners who are interested in submitting proposals additional time in that process. Finally, I wanted to celebrate a little bit. We are retiring what has been our old background record check system in legacy. As many of you are aware, this is an operational issue for the agency, but the very first step in the workforce system is our background record check, and we do a range of background record checks on staff working in both our child care programs as well as our residential programs. That process has been difficult and slow in the past, and the agency over many years has been working to update and modernize that process. And we took our final step in August by migrating all of our program staff and background record checks for our residential and placement programs into our new, more modern Navigator system. And I want to recognize the team that worked on that, and also thank our stakeholders who worked with us on helping us design and do communications in a way. So it's a really big, important step for us to make sure that that very first step in the workforce development system, that we're doing the background record checks that we need, but that we're also doing them in a way that doesn't hold up the hiring of staff and programs. So happy to be announcing that. Lastly, I just wanted to acknowledge the state of emergency that the governor has declared around our homeless system and the migrant homeless population that is really overflowing our shelter system right now. There are many young children in families that are also in those shelters and in the hotels. And we are working closely with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, with our partners at the Executive Office of Education and Health and Human Services, so that we can create a statewide coordinated effort that's really responding to the needs of families in the shelters. There are incredible things happening across the state, and many of our partners, through our community and family engagement grants and our Head Start programs and our child care programs, are responding today on the ground to the needs of families. And we're committed to working with our local partners and with our state agency partners to make sure that we're responding to the needs of these families and supporting them through what will likely be an extended period of time of need and support. So we will update the board as those efforts evolve. And that concludes my updates.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do just want to acknowledge too, and I appreciate the leadership and the kind of intergovernmental approach to the sheltered migrant issue, and also acknowledge that even today there are providers across the Commonwealth who are dealing with weather-related issues and water main breaks out in Western Mass that are disrupting the way that you all deliver and provide for children and families. And so, committed to making sure that we continue to partner, just like we are in this case, to ensuring that we're there for children and families when they need it. And so, thinking about all the leaders out there in the Commonwealth who are faced with some of these challenges, but also challenging ourselves to think about how to create opportunities for kids and families throughout it. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, and do want to just lift up the background system process as well. I think there's been a consistent theme over the last year and a half or so of operational improvements in service of yes, modernizing, but also creating efficiency for users in the field as it relates to how we partner with them. And so, another great example of kind of that modernization and efficiency, and just want to thank you and the team for that as well. At this time, I'll move to the public comment portion of the meeting, and I'd like to call up Lucas Skorseski from Acre Family Child. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will echo, this is a very busy time, so thank you very much for this opportunity to come before you and provide input from the field. In your materials today, you should see a letter from Acre Family Child Care regarding the exclusion of family child care systems from C3 funds. In addition to this letter, I'm here today to provide a more personal appeal regarding the value of family child care systems as part of the early childhood workforce. Obviously, there are differences between center-based programs and family child care systems. I do not have any actual classrooms or teachers. But let's look at some of the many supports that family child care systems do provide to educators and families that are the same as at center-based programs. Transportation, for example. At Acre, we employ bus drivers and own a fleet of vehicles. As DCF cases have risen, it is these buses and drivers that ensure these children make it to care and are part of the larger community. About 20% of the children we work with are school age, and we are responsible for getting them between care and school. The cost of our most recent vehicle we're purchasing has risen $25,000 over the last 4 years. Overall at Acre, we've seen a 26% increase in the number of children served as compared prior to COVID. It is our contract managers, enrollment specialists, billing professionals that have accommodated this increased demand. While working with more children, more families, and more educators, we are working with the exact same size staff. Our experience is for listed positions to remain vacant for 9 to 12 months. Roles like home visitors demand a certain level of education, experience, bilingual proficiency, and cannot be done remotely and are too critical to the success of providers to relax on these requirements. These are some of the challenges we are facing on a daily basis: a local demand to scale, a dramatic change in the labor market, inflation outpacing rate increases. Sustainable solutions require sustainable funding, and to date, family child care systems across the state are yet to receive a single dollar in C3 support. C3 funds were designed to be non-competitive, yet these last 2 years we have been picking winners and losers. These funds are no longer temporary. They are no longer a pandemic relief program. This is a permanent vehicle in investing in the health of our sector. As my colleagues appropriately use their C3 funds to increase wages, benefits, create hiring or retention bonuses, and invest in the future of their organizations, we are financially operating in a pre-COVID world. We're operationally trying to solve post-COVID problems. This critical program was quickly put together to rescue a vulnerable sector during the most chaotic moments of an unforeseen global health crisis, and I like to think we got it about 95% right. It is now time to acknowledge that family child care systems are part of the early childhood workforce and that we need your support. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge that FCC systems do work with some of the most vulnerable and at-risk families in the state. Many of the most needy families are not in priority population contracts. There is no add-on fee we are receiving when we support these families with new clothes, hotel rooms, groceries. We will always intervene in the best interest of a child, whether it is a part of our contract reimbursement or not. We are determined to respond to meet the unique and growing needs of our community, as I have no doubt this is the same view as each person around this room. I'm here today as a partner, as a colleague, and I'm seeking your assistance in ensuring that the mixed delivery system is as strong as possible. And I thank you for your support and look forward to dialogue around this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas, for adding your voice, perspective, and for your partnership and for being here today. Is there anyone else here in the audience that's here for public comment? I do, as Lucas mentioned, I do want to acknowledge that the board has received public comment by email from various providers on the same topic that was submitted prior to the board meeting, so thank you. Two pieces of routine business. We have before us the minutes of the June 13th, 2023 board meeting. I do want to acknowledge receipt of an email received by myself and the commissioner from board member Curenton, who was unable to register her vote on the change of bylaws during the June meeting. She's indicated that she's in favor of the bylaws. This will be reflected in the September minutes, and the email will be attached to those minutes. Are there any additional corrections, additions, or edits to the minutes? No? Hearing none, I'd like to make a motion to approve the June 13th board meeting. Can I have a second?
Second.
Maria, thank you, and I'll call the roll. Stephanie Curenton.
Approved.
Morris Siegel.
Yes.
Nikki Ruiz.
Abstain.
Carolyn Kane.
Yes.
Maura Miller. Maria Moeller, sorry. Sorry, Maria Moeller.
Yes.
Dr. Sager.
Yes.
Jamila Lee.
Yes.
Georgia Tanasoff.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes as well. Secretary Tuttle.
Yes.
Thank you. Cheryl Travers.
Yes.
We'll get this hybrid thing figured out eventually. Thank you, Cheryl. The minutes of the June 13th, 2023 board meeting are approved. Next, we have before us the minutes of the August 21st, 2023 board retreat. Are there any additions, corrections, or edits? Hearing none, I make the motion to approve the minutes of the August 21st, 2023 board retreat. Can I have a second?
Yes.
Linda, thank you, and I'll call a roll. Dr. Carrington?
Yes.
Maura Siegel?
Yes.
Nikki Ruiz? Carolyn Kane?
Yes.
Maria Moeller?
Yes.
Linda Sager?
Yes.
Jamila Lee?
Yes.
Georgia Tanasoff? And Secretary Tutwiler?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes as well. Thank you all. And Cheryl. Cheryl,
Yes.
thank you. Appreciate that. And it passes. Great. Now we'll go to the items for discussion, and really wanted to take a minute to, I know we've referenced it a few times, but talk a little bit about the board retreat that the board participated in on August 21st. I want to begin by just with some thanks to the Guild of St. Agnes in Worcester, who hosted us, and I couldn't think of a better setting for us to be in during the day, surrounded by people in the field, kids, and to hear directly from some of the staff and leadership at the Guild about some of the challenges and opportunities that they're facing, as well as seeing a beautiful new building. And so I want to congratulate the Guild on opening their building and on their partnership with Worcester State University to continue to think about how to innovate and create a workforce pipeline for the field. I also want to thank the leadership team at EEC who joined us. It was a good commitment of time to really come together with the board, and really walked away feeling like, again, we all come from different perspectives and different seats, but we all share in the same goal of, again, providing affordable, accessible, and quality early education care in a really complex environment right now. And the tone and tenor of the conversation, I think, really is positioning us well for the work ahead. And so want to thank the team that joined us, as well as the board here, for your feedback and commentary at the retreat, where we really did get an opportunity to take a look back, but really set the stage for the work forward, which many of the topics will be part of today. And so I know I reflected deeply on that time together, just on the evolution of the department and about the way that we're utilizing all of the information that we have today, whether it's the data that we're getting from C3 or the mechanisms that we're creating to create more accessible data and transparent data to help inform decisions. And so want to thank the board for your feedback and input on how we build that muscle in partnership with the department, so that, again, we can share in that vision of providing quality care across the Commonwealth. And so I wanted to just take a moment to open it up to anyone here on the board, Commissioner, Mr. Secretary, for your thoughts and reflections and takeaways from that retreat for people to hear.
Well, I'll say what was so exciting to me was just all the information about the accomplishments that EEC has made, the new initiatives they've implemented in terms of the financial accomplishments, the reforming financial assistance, the rate increases. What I knew before I joined the board was what I read in the newspaper, and I realized that this was a huge issue. So to hear how far you have come, and now I'm part of that, is just very exciting. And I know we're going to talk more about that today. I know how important it is. But I'm just very appreciative of all the work that's been done in that area.
As a representative from the field, it was just really evident that the commissioner is listening and really taking a lot of feedback from the field. A lot of the initiatives that happened last year have been so helpful, and it really, many of them I know come as a direct recommendation from the field. So I just want to thank you for that.
I would add, same sentiment. I think the two words I walked away with feeling so grateful for is humility and accountability. I think you've demonstrated a level of humility in listening and being open to where we've gone wrong and what we have to fix over the past year and going forward. And it's amazing leadership from you and the team commissioner to be that humble, and then to also push yourselves and hold yourselves and us all accountable with this upcoming sort of more systematic view on how we're performing is something I'm really, really motivated and excited about. So cheers.
Thank you. Any other feedback or comments?
I would just offer my regrets for not being able to attend. I had a long-standing family commitment on the calendar, and I heard some feedback informally and now hearing it more formally. Sorry I could not be there, but I do appreciate the deck and the pre-read that was put together, very comprehensive. Not the same as being there in person, obviously, but still an education for me.
No, and I would just close with, more just kind of lifting up your comments there. I think for a lot of times government feels like we have like one chance to get it right, but I really feel like we're kind of living in this kind of continuous improvement and how to do things better always. And I think that mindset was evident during the retreat from both the leadership team and the questions that the board engaged about just again sharing in that challenge of doing this work better. And so, just even reflecting on Lucas's testimony, like again, there's a view that we got at 95% right. Like, how do we keep challenging ourselves to continue to do it right? And we're never going to be 100% to everybody. It's a very complex system, but knowing the level of dialogue around that table about still accepting that challenge to do our best was evident. And so just want to thank everybody for the partnership and leadership.
Great, yes, thank you. I thought I would just spend a couple minutes for our folks at home and here, just reviewing kind of what we covered at the retreat. And what we laid out to accomplish during the retreat was to kind of lay a foundation for the year ahead, to make sure that we were grounded in sort of the work we had done in the past year, how that laid a foundation for what would come next, and also a quick review of sort of the finances. So I'm not going to review these in great detail. We had a chance to do it at the retreat, and this information is available online. But key areas of accomplishments that we really focused on, we're going to hear much more about our child care financial assistance reforms in just a minute. The increase in our rates, and something we look forward to continuing our work around equity in our rate structure and in our availability and access for families. In addition to really building on the work that we've done this year around the cost of care and making sure that the policies and the programs and the resources are allocated in a way that reflects the true cost of care, both for families and for the providers delivering services. Thrilled about the C3 program and being able to continue to learn about the impact of that program as we look hopefully to the future around continued sustainability of that program and strengthening it and enhancing it. We have done much work over the last year around our workforce and the urgent and emergent needs, really, of unstaffed classrooms and families needing care. While we continue to work on urgent issues, we also continue to look at the horizon around a career pathway for our programs and look forward to more of that in the year ahead. And then updating and modernizing our agency operations. We've been in a very aggressive hiring pattern to build capacity and recruit incredible talent, which we have at the agency, and that's reflected in the work we've been able to do. But our systems, whether it's our background record check or our licensing system or our child care financial assistance system, and focused on making sure that the users, whether they're our staff, our families, our providers, or our educators, have the modern technology and access to information they need to do their work as effectively as possible. At the retreat, we also kind of took a fresh look at what we wanted to do in terms of our strategic initiatives for the year ahead. So building on that foundation that we've created during this fiscal year, we will continue our work around family access, program quality. We have pulled out the issue of program stability and financing as a separate stream of work that we think is really essential to the health of the sector, and our workforce supports as well as ongoing agency infrastructure. As the Secretary said, and when this board last met in June, we did not have a final budget yet, but it is an historic investment in early education and care and in the agency. And it crosses all the levers that we are looking as we continue to try and build a healthy, strong sector that can create equity and access for our families. So additional funding for child care financial assistance across our programs, including $25 million more for serving families from our waiting list. $475 million in our C3 program, and I just want to note there are a lot of states who are really struggling right now with the end of this COVID era funding. There are stories almost every day about concerns that states are having. This was a COVID-era stabilization program, emergency supports to programs, and Massachusetts, under leadership of Governor Healy, has stepped up in the support of the legislature to fully fund this program in state dollars. So we are in a very different position than many other states are as a result. Being able to continue to support those programs and have a chance, including today, to think about how we transition from that emergency stabilization into ongoing supports for our sector. We also have $45 million for a rate increase, and we look forward in future board meetings to coming back and talking more about how we will use that to continue to reform our rate structure, comply with federal requirements, but also make sure that we're creating access and equity for our families. Additional $1.5 million in our early childhood mental health grant, and we look forward to talking more this year about behavioral health needs in the early education sector. It's something I hear about in every single program visit, the challenges that our programs are having in terms of supporting children's positive behavioral health and the impact that's having on staff recruitment and retention. So it's a cross-system issue. Not on this slide, but there was also an additional $15 million in the budget that was included for capital funds to support our programs, and we're looking forward to exploring the ways to get those funds out to support both our family child care providers who haven't had access to capital funds in the past, as well as really thinking about school safety and security issues are two high priorities for those funds. And just a reminder for the board that we do have a preschool development grant, which is a federal funding, $36 million over 3 years, which helps augment support and catalyze additional support for the initiatives that we have underway. Finally, I'll remind you at the retreat, we took a look at what the year ahead might look like, and we have big and important topics. We're going to continue to talk about Commonwealth Cares for Children starting today by reviewing the survey findings from the spring and thinking about what that program continues to look like going forward. We're going to talk about our child care financial assistance reforms, and that'll be an ongoing topic for the year as well. We're going to be launching revisions to our child care licensing regulations. So we reformed our child care financial assistance regulations. We are in the process of a community engagement process around our residential and placement regulations, and child care licensing will also be part of our list for reforms, and we'll be launching that at our next board meeting. We'll have a chance to talk about the approach that we'll be taking and some of the key goals we'll have for that process. Looking at that horizon around the long-term work and professionalization of the workforce, we're going to come back to you and talk a little bit about the work we're doing on educator credentialing and certification and meaningful career pathways for our educators. Again, those licensing regulations for our residential programs will come back at some point during this year for a vote to the board to be sent to public comment. And you'll remember in June, we talked Chapter 1 about high-quality programs and the agency's approach to supporting quality and continuous quality improvement, something we do at the agency and we want to support across the field. And so we're going to continue this year talking about both standards and expectations around quality, but also the infrastructure to support that quality in the field. I guess I'll just end by saying how grateful I am to the members of the board for your engagement in those discussions. We found your feedback and your input to be essential and valuable in us thinking about how to set the year ahead. And we're really grateful for your partnership and leadership. And I know it's going to be a busy year, so we look forward to it.
Thank you. Any other comments on the retreat? Great. Move on to the next agenda. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to invite Tyrese Nicholas, who's our Deputy Commissioner for Family Access and Engagement, and I'm going to give a couple introductory comments. So, as the board is aware, we have been in an end-to-end review of our child care financial assistance system. No stone unturned, looking at across our system, whether it's the experience of families, the experience of providers, what technology we use. And the foundation for that has really been our regulations, and I thank the board for their vote to support our changed regulations, which is really just the start of the process. They build a foundation on which new technology, new policies, new communication, and new tools for families are going to be built upon. And we are coming up on a very important milestone, which is the effective date of those new regulations will be October 1st. So I've asked Tyrese to come and update you on a number of the different initiatives that have been underway over the last year, as well as talk a little bit about our strategy for implementation. a change as big as we are making, really shifting a system focus. We see our job as facilitating access to programs that families are eligible for. And we want to do that in a way that brings modern technology and responsiveness and respect and dignity to the experience of families. And so this is a fairly significant change for our system. And so there isn't going to be a switch that goes on October 2nd when the regulations go into effect. But we do anticipate kind of a several-year culture change, training, and change management process. So we'll talk a little bit about that. One thing I did want to just update you on quickly is where we are on the overall caseload. So child care financial assistance, is provided to families who are income eligible or who are involved with the Department of Transitional Assistance or who are working with the Department of Children and Families. We had a pre-COVID high of about 57,000 families that were being served. Obviously, with program closures, we had a dip to about 42,000 for the number of families that were being served, and we had a goal to try and get back up to our pre-COVID levels. And as of June of this year, as of this summer this year, we are back up to 58,000 in our caseload, which is fantastic. And I want to thank our child care resource and referral agencies and the staff at EEC and our programs who serve and participate in the child care financial assistance programs for their work in reaching additional families. So these are families who are now able to pursue their own economic mobility goals while their children are enrolled in high-quality early education programs, and we look forward to continuing this work. I attribute some of these changes really to some of the initiatives that you're going to hear about, some sort of administrative and technology changes we were able to make, some policy shifts we were able to make in the short term, and we look forward to this work continuing as we move forward. This slide shares a little bit about child care financial assistance by the various programs. So we have dedicated programs for our DTA-involved families and those that are served by the Department of Children and Families. And then the yellow line at the top is our income-eligible program. And that program includes priorities for homeless families, families with disabilities, families experiencing domestic violence. It's also the program where we're serving our new priority, which is staff working in early education and care programs. So most of you are aware that this year we rolled out a pilot with the support of funding from the legislature to prioritize those working in early education and care programs, both an opportunity to support additional economic mobility for families who are income eligible, but also a really important recruitment and retention tool for our programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Tyrese to walk you through some of the other initiatives.
Thank you, Commissioner. Afternoon, Chair, Secretary, and the rest of the board. I am happy to start my presentation talking about our early educator staff pilot and where we are with that pilot. So as many of you know, this pilot launched in January 11th. I remember this. This was one of my first initiatives. And so far, we have reached a little over 2,500 children from our early education staff, and over 1,200 are actually enrolled. And then you'll see here on the slide, there's 503 children that are eligible and in an eligibility process, whether they're working through the eligibility process or they're waiting for a child care placement. On the right side, or depending on where you're looking at, right or left, you'll see enrollment by age group. And you'll see the biggest enrollment by age is in our preschool, the preschool age. And then the lowest right now is the family child care under 2. So this pilot, this started as a pilot. I'm happy to share that we're moving this to a priority status, recognizing that our early education staff, they need to be able to care for their own children and be able to alleviate some of the cost. And we recognize how important it was in ensuring that there was immediate access for the educators that are caring for our children. And I always say our children because I'm a parent, so I'm going to move on. All right, so our child care financial assistance reforms. So the commissioner talked about, we did an end-to-end year review of our child care financial assistance program. And through that, that started, I want to say it was December of 2022, and it was really looking at everything, right? Like opening the book and seeing the good and the bad and the in-between and really taking time to assess. Like what is going on? Are we really servicing families? Are families in the center? Are we supporting programs and educators and our subsidy administrators and actually being able to provide equal access to families in a way that is supportive to them and moves them through the system in a way that makes sense? That makes sense. And so we got to why we are changing, and we're changing because we recognize we need equity and access. We need equity and access. We know that many families are on the wait list for years. And part of that is part of our processes. And so we really look through how do we get better? And so the what is changing is we started with our regulations, which we see our regulations as our foundation. I've been talking about this almost as if like you're building a house or you're renovating. In this case, we're renovating. And when you're renovating, you have to look at the foundation. And so that we looked at our foundation, right? That's the end-to-end review. We shifted and made changes to our regulations. And now we're looking at what are our guiding principles, right? So now we're like, what's the structure around the foundation? And so we're building up. So from our foundation of our regs comes our policies, and we're seeing our policies as our guiding principles, right? Like, why are we doing this? That is what our policies are, and then our procedures are going to be how do we put it into practice, right? How do we put it into practice? And so you'll see some of the what is changing as we change the contract structure of our child care resource and referral agencies. We wanted to recognize the work that they're doing, and we want to get better at supporting them and really meeting the needs of our families. So we re-procured that contract and focusing on like four core service areas. So those areas are like eligibility services, provider services, family services, right? Family services and encompassing those things. And then we're looking at modernizing the experience, right? Heavily paper process. Many agencies have moved away from paper. We're not quite there yet. We're not quite there yet. And so looking at what could we change during this process, and then really improving and expanding the way that families interact with us. You know, I started here at EEC about 10 months ago. I can't even believe it's been 10 months. And one of the first things I said is, how do families talk to us? How, right? Is it that they have to email the commissioner? Or like, what does that look like? And so we're looking at how do we expand that? Like, how can they talk to us? Is it through our child care resource and referral agencies? Is it through one of our partner agencies? Is it through a family child care system? Is it through another provider? But looking at that as well. And then the how we're gonna achieve this. So the biggest how is we've really been engaging with our stakeholders. And many people have highlighted, thank you, Maria, highlighting like the importance of the feeling that EEC is listening. And so this is an iterative process, and we're gonna listen. We're gonna continue to listen. We cannot do this work without our stakeholders. And so we engaged in internal and external working groups, and we're gonna continue to do that. And we're hearing like, what's good, what's working? We did that with the regs. Right? We started that with the regulations. We said, how's that working? We did it with our CCR and our procurement. We engaged with our stakeholders there through a number of visioning sessions. And now we're doing that, and then we moved and we did that in our policy work, engaging our stakeholders. And our hope is really, we want to be able to like increase the flexibility. And in doing that, we're acknowledging the needs of families. Right? You're acknowledging the needs of families and treating them with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And then we're removing the complexities. You know, we're removing the complexities. We want a system that makes sense no matter who you are. No matter who you are, you should be able to understand what our system is and understand what the expectations are. And then the last box here is the win. And so the commissioner talked about we have a big day coming ahead, October 1. And we know that this is going to be, it's a runway. It's going to take us a while, right? This is a huge shift, and we want to be very intentional in the way that we roll out the new changes. And so we see that process being iterative and it being inclusive of all of our stakeholders to get it right. And we might get some things wrong, but it's a long-term mindset mindset shift, culture shift that's going to include everyone. And so I'll talk a little bit later around like what's the formal plan for implementation, but we're really taking a phased development approach around all these changes. And we want to do that because we have to ensure that we're able to have a feedback loop. So we want to be able to engage with our stakeholders and the partners that we're working with who will have the greatest impact. And we don't want to miss anyone. We don't want to miss anyone. I'm going to pause. Are there any questions before I jump into all the updates on our initiatives? All right.
Can I just ask,
Sure.
you just talked a little bit about it, like how do families interact with the EC right now?
Mostly through our child care resource and referral agencies or through our EEC subsidy mailbox. And so if they have questions, they'll send an email to our subsidy mailbox. Sometimes they might reach our call center, but the call center isn't necessarily their target audience isn't necessarily families. Yeah. Or some people have gotten lucky and found my phone number. Right.
I'll say anecdotally, a lot of people find random email addresses and phone numbers that they just use to try to access somebody.
Yeah. Or, if they're working with a partner agency, like I want to highlight the importance of like our partners. The families will communicate with our partners. We have many, our Department of Children and Families and Department of Transitional Assistance. Oftentimes, they may have families that might not be eligible for eligible for child care through their program, and they'll connect them. And sometimes the CCR&Rs will do that as well, and other providers, word of mouth.
Yeah.
And word of mouth.
I'll add that it's incredible that this regulation changes have not been really implemented until right October 1st is the date, but we're already seeing some major increase in enrollment. And it's a lot of the initiatives that have happened, but also mindset, right? Like it has been a huge change in mindset at a personal level. CCR&Rs reach out, are changing their own mindsets, right, because of EEC changing how it works. And every time the CCR&Rs reach out to EEC, they just try to find a way to make the regulations work with the family versus being so rigid with regards to, well, no, they're not eligible, so they just take them out of the way. They actually are looking at the human factor. It just is, it's great. And even without the regulation being implemented, it's already, working. So thank you.
Thank you. I will say that we have made some changes to policies and procedures where we could. We have an awesome team, our legal team, who helps us interpret what our regulations say and helps us find the flexibility. And so we are doing that. And so we've been encouraging our partners to reach out to us where we may have been a little more rigid in the past. We're like, what can we do and how can we get to it? If we can get to a yes, then we try to get to a yes. And so we made we made a couple of those changes probably within the first 3 months of me starting. Just like sending out policy advisories. So it's like, how do we respond to the needs of families, right? You said that it's the human aspect, human aspect. Life happens, but how can we be responsive? And honestly, it makes it easier for providers to work with families. It is. And so we talk a lot about families, but our providers, we couldn't do it without our providers. We couldn't do it without our family access administrators. They're the ones helping facilitate the access for the eligible families. So our current initiatives, I'm just going to give some quick updates here. Our CCR&R contract, we reprocured that contract effective July 1. We're actively working with our CCR&Rs around that shift, right? What does that mean? That means we now are looking at a unified approach to customer service, a unified approach to working with families. So it shouldn't matter what part of the state you're in, your experience, right? The family experience should be the same. So one of the highlighted changes in this contract is that we're implementing key performance indicators. And so there's some accountability measures there, not just for the CCR&Rs, but also for EEC. What can they expect from us? Right? They can expect that what they can expect for us that we'll be responsive, and where we can make adjustments, we will, and we will hear them. And then what we expect from them, we expect them to be able to facilitate access to eligible families and to do that in a timely manner. And so we'll be working with them collectively to establish a unified set of key performance indicators and then individual key performance indicators over the next year.
There's kind of, so what is the feedback loop on that, right? So how is there a standard set where there's a systematic way to give CCNRs that feedback on KPIs, indicators, the accountability?
We're developing them.
Great.
We're developing them. So this is new. It's new for
In
all
collaboration.
of us. In collaboration. So what was key in this procurement is the two words was collaborative and in partnership. And so even when, when contracts were effective July 1, they're like, Tyrese, what does this mean? I'm like, we're going to work on it together. And so we talked about this being a phased implementation approach. It's going to be a phased implementation approach for our CCR&Rs as well, because we want to make sure that we're hearing them. So Paul is really in collaboration with them and outlining a structure. Right? What does that structure look like? And our intention is to be able to have regional coordinators to support them. So key in major change management is support and resources. And so EEC wants to ensure that we don't set expectations if we haven't provided the resources and the necessary support to our partners.
And you meet every Monday with them, right?
We meet it's shifting, but usually it's every Wednesday, yes.
Oh,
So
every
we meet
Wednesday.
every Wednesday, right? We meet with them and, we do a lot of emailing back and forth. It's an adjustment period. I'm new, right? I'm new, so they're learning me, I'm learning them. And I've been very candid and transparent with them that I'm learning. And there are going to be some things I don't understand, and I have no problem saying I don't understand, and I expect the same from them. And, I have to say they have been responsive because it's a big shift. It's a big shift for everyone, but they've been responsive, yes. Our hope is, and I don't even want to say our hope, our intention is to be able to meet regularly with our contracted providers as well. And so I'm going to move to our contracted provider procurement, re-procurement, as the commissioner stated, that has been delayed. It's delayed. We have an extension there, but we're looking forward to being able to do that work. This was an area they were like, hey, during our policy, we had a policy working group, our providers were like, hey, there's a lot happening, and it's all going to happen at the same time. Have you considered extending it? And so we took that feedback, and we were able to get that extension. Again, we want to be responsive, not just to the needs of families, but the needs of our providers. So providers have to have the ability and the time to be able to facilitate access, right? And so we know that this was a busy time for them. I'm going to bypass policy procedure changes. We're in the midst. We're here. We're on our runway. Family engagement. So we've been engaging families a little bit different. We've been starting to engage them through text messaging and emailing. And so there's no more just snail mail for our families on the wait list. I'm happy to share that we launched the SMS text pilot in June. We've reached over 250 families via text, and these are families who are on the wait list. So our SMS text pilot is our way of being able to send little text message nudges to families that are being notified by the child care resource and referral agencies that funding is available for them, so that child care is available for them. In the past, the families would receive snail mail, so they would get a letter in the mail. Now they're receiving the letter in the mail and a text message that says, hey, we sent you a letter. Child care is available for you. If you want to start to continue the process, please call Mass 211. So Mass 211 is our child care call center that assists us. They also provide resources to other resources across the state to families, and then they receive nudges, the text message nudges throughout the application process for child care financial assistance. So of course we have to get consent. We receive the consent from them by sending them an email ahead of time if we have email addresses. To date, we have received consent for a little over 6,000 families for text messaging. And that we did partly, the way we did that is through our Waitlist Cleanup Project. So we launched the Waitlist Cleanup Project in June as well. And through that project, we're reaching out to families that are currently on the waitlist, and we're saying, hey, the waitlist is moving, right? Hey, the waitlist is moving. Please update your information. We did this via a survey. And so we emailed, We emailed about 11,000 families on the wait list. We emailed 11,000, and then for those families who didn't have emails, we mailed them letters, and that was around 4,700. To date, we've received over 6,000 responses on the survey, and that was in June. And the survey asked them, are they still interested in care? Has any of their information changed? Do they have a child that's already in care, that is receiving child care financial assistance? And through that, and if they've moved out of state. So if they've moved out, we'll remove them. But what we've been doing from this survey is prioritizing families on the wait list. So there are families there who have sibling access and may not have been aware that they've had sibling access. So we're doing outreach, direct outreach to those families, working in collaboration with FCC and RNRs to move them off, right? These are families that already receiving child care financial assistance. They're already eligible, and they should have had the sibling access. So I'm happy to report, like, the waitlist cleanup project will be coming like towards an end in October. We're hoping that we'll receive more responses, and we'll be able, where we can, to facilitate immediate access or priority access for some of those families. And then the last thing is, sure.
What are we? That's fabulous that 6,000 out of 16,000 have responded. Do you have any, like, here's the 3 big domains of answer yet? Or are you going to give that, like, what exactly are they saying?
So remember, it's a survey with questions, and so we do know how many. Let me just see. Of course, I have some notes. I have some of the.
Maybe even high level. Sorry to interrupt.
So high level.
Do they still need help, or are they like, oh no, I've moved on?
Oh no, 5,900 still need help.
Okay, out of the 6,000,
right.
like
out of that,
just making sure.
59 still need. It's very small amounts that either have sibling access or have moved or who no longer wanted care. Right, like that's it. It's interesting. My son attends the Boys and Girls Club. I've shared that before, but I was there yesterday, and someone who knows me says, hey, I got a text message, and I completed that survey, and none of my children, and I was like, it's like on the spot, not knowing this person doesn't know I work for EC, just knows me as a resource. Right. I used to work at DTA, and so she knew me as a resource, and she's like, "Do you still work at that agency?" I was like, "No," and didn't want to say where I work, but it's good to hear that it's working, right? And that she's like, "I'm following up. I've called. I was like, all your information up to date." Absolutely. She said, "I will keep calling every month," and and that's okay. And that's okay. My hope is that we're being responsive. So, of course, I'm checking to see if we're being responsive.
So, Tyrese, I would just, at some point when the time is right, and because I know you got a lot going on, like, it would be great for the board to see kind of the evolution of this wait list.
Absolutely.
I mean, I know when I've started, people have said, like, wait list, and, like, you can see their whole body just like, like, now that it seems like there's some energy and excitement about, like, some of the improvements and about the user experience, which I love, and how we're interacting with families. Again, at the right time, I'll defer to you guys when that is, but this fiscal year, to just kind of see, like, tell that story a little bit on what we're seeing.
Absolutely. And without me giving out too much information, already some of what we've learned about the wait list is, like, is it really a wait list, right? Or really should we move to a placement list? And part of the changes we're making, part of the big changes we're making in policy is around the wait list. And so we're actually instituting a wait list screening process. So we'll be determining a soft eligibility check at the beginning. And we're also shifting the way that we're asking our family access administrators to pull families off the wait list. So we added, like, a 4th thing. So you're not just looking at the date they were placed on the wait list, the date that they require care, or if they meet one of our priority statuses, but do they already have a child in placement somewhere? Right? Because there are families who are eligible and already are paying a private pay and have been doing so, like the mom of 3 I ran into yesterday, right? And so those are some of the changes that we're making. All of these initiatives are really driving the way that we're moving the regulations to policies to procedures. So I'm happy to share that. The last initiative that we haven't talked a lot about it, but our digital application and our financial assistance case tracker. This is specifically this piloted with just one child care resource and referral agency in the central and western part of the state. We have now moved to all the CCRNRs. And the goal is to move to full implementation of the financial assistance case tracker. What that means is that all families, whether they're whether they're on the wait list or whether they're coming over by referral from one of our partner agencies, will be able to track their journey, right? Track their journey from being placed on the wait list to being notified of funding through to placement. And so currently this is it's the CCRNRs working with Mass 211, and they work collaboratively and in partnership. So I say you're going to hear collaborative and partnership a lot. And essentially through this, what happens is our child care resource and referral agency says, hey, I'm sending out funding letters to this group of families. We email them, and we see if they're interested in, if they're opting into text, because we want to be able to move to texting all our families to be able to communicate with them. And then Mass 211 will do an outreach call. And so we've instituted a human touch in our process, right? So we're not just modernizing our system, and we're treating families differently, and we're changing the different modes of the way that we communicate. And critical in here is that there's a digital application. So they say digital application, it's really an Adobe application, but it allows families to complete a fillable application and then return it. And Mass 211 will review it, and upon its completion, they'll notify the CCRNR that is complete, and then it goes to the CCRNR. We can go in, EC staff or the Child Care Resource and Referral Agency or Mass 211 can go on the fax system and see where a family's at. It allows there to be more visibility into the process for a family. So,
Sorry,
Sure.
This is a little bit in the weeds, but are families able to submit their documentation through that digital application? Or do they
we're
still need to
working
work
on it. So
Okay.
that is, so it's,
Yeah.
so I should say, like, our financial assistance case tracker, it's our interim solution, right?
We are pretty far in the weeds, though.
We
So
are
Okay, sorry,
maybe
sorry.
no. It's a
We
great
can chat
question.
after
Just
and- yeah.
So yeah, it's our, we can definitely chat, Nikki. It's our interim solution.
Yes, okay.
So that's moving along. I want to be respectful of time, Commissioner.
The team is extremely excited about the changes that we're making and to share, with all of our stakeholders the details of the work they've done. Yeah.
Which has been a lot. So here is just really the timeline. So December regs draft through public comment, again, connecting with our stakeholders and getting feedback. We got the board's review, approval of the regs. Those were finalized. Then we moved to the policies. Through the policies, we established like a policy working group, and through that working group, we engaged with 13 organizations, and we're still engaging with them from that work. We learned we learned that we need them. We need them through the entire process, so we're continuing to work with them. So we presented our policies to them. They gave us feedback. We worked collaboratively, got those done. Policies were finalized, and now they're helping us with the procedures. How do we put it into practice? So we're meeting weekly with the procedures working group, and they're going to continue to work with us. And we also have asked them to volunteer their staff. We're like, you're the experts. You're doing the work out there. Please join us in partnership so that we can train. So our stakeholders are they're going to be a part of our training team. And priorities and approach, we talked about this. Our three main goals, really: prioritizing families, increasing our overall system efficiencies, and modernizing and updating our system. All of our initiatives really were really focused around these three goals. And you'll see, and I won't go through all the buckets, but you'll see proactive communication. I talked about that. We increased the modes of communication, improving our options on, a digital application, a case tracker, facilitating better access for our priority populations, and then really being able to evaluate what we're doing, what needs to change, and what moves from pilot, right? What moves from a pilot into actual practice? And so mostly all of our initiatives that started off as pilots are really moving into full implementation. Commissioner, did you want to add anything here?
Only I think, we, as I mentioned, the regulations provide a sort of foundation and a guidepost for where we want to go. They communicate sort of the values of where we want to go, but the detail is often where the experience of families lives. And so the intention of sort of this, and you'll see on the next slide too, is that how you translate what are sort of regulatory ideas and notions and principles into the practice and policy every day. So it's things like we've changed a lot of language in terms of how we refer to families and what languages we're providing information in. We're gonna, we're changing to make sure that the burden is on the system and not on the family. We're reducing a lot of what had been sort of, I would say, over-verification of families, so reducing it to the minimum needs. And that's how we translate what is a policy, what the regulations say we want to do. We're going to, the regulations might say minimum documentation, and then policy is going to translate that, and then procedure will go one level deeper. So these are how we're sort of executing on the regulatory frameworks through policy, and then again, deeper into procedure. So we could write the best possible regulations, but on the front line, if we haven't translated, as Maria was saying, kind of the mindset and the spirit of what we're trying to change. So this was intended to sort of communicate how we're making that shift from that regulatory framework that you all supported into sort of policy and practice that changes the experience of families.
And the big changes. So we went from 135 pages in our policies to 33. What we learned was that we had policies, procedures, and user technical guidance all mixed into one, and we learned some of that. We learned that from working with our partners and talking internally. And so what we did is we streamlined 33 pages by program. So there are 3 programs for child care financial assistance, income eligible, DTA, and DCF. As the commissioner shared earlier, our homeless families are families experiencing homelessness, domestic violence, or disability. They're actually within our income eligible population. And so here, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, we recognize that really policy is our guiding principles and procedure is how do you do it. And so we just separated that out.
I guess the other thing I would just add on here is to really reflect what we think is a shift away from a system focus.
Yeah.
Right. So on the left-hand side, you have here's how the system works. Here's what the waitlist does. Here's how this thing works. Here's how that thing works to the user. So the experience of our families who are income eligible or have priorities within that, the experience of DCF and the experience of our DTA families. So the guides are really written for those who are administering the system. So the other thing the policies used to do was sort of a mix of communicating with parents and the public and family access administrators. So they're really designed for those who are interacting with families, but intended to sort of drive whatever the journey is and to be consistent across the policies as much as possible.
Yeah,
So.
and we try to incorporate the spirit of what we're doing in the policy and the spirit of what we expect in the procedures. Right.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate what I said in the beginning too, which is the timeline had us sort of ending with October 1st, but it really is a beginning of the change process. And I want to thank again our partners for being willing. We don't have a training team, as I've said, although we are intently trying to build that. And so in order for us to get out and communicate about the changes, we've been asking our partners to train the trainers and to create a training process and team with us. And they have all volunteered to do that. So I'm really grateful for that. And I think that will help with adoption of the changes in a lot of ways because we'll be building experts and super users within the system and within the field.
Yeah,
So.
we're going to call them champions of change. Right. And so it's like we're in this together. And so creating communities, of practice so that, because that's what already happens. I want to say that too, that already happens, but being more intentional about it. I think that was my last slide.
I think that's
it.
So I just want to say Tyrese has provided incredible leadership, but there's a team, many of whom were here in the room, across EEC and within our partner agencies who've been contributing, and we're not going to get it right on day one. So I know there'll be some lumpy, bumpy things, but I think as long as we're being clear around the mindset and the spirit of what we're trying to do, I know that over time we'll get to where we want to get with the policies and procedures. So thank you, Tyrese,
Thank you.
and thank you to the team for their work.
Thank you.
And I would just encourage, and I appreciate, I'm going to use your words, collaboration and partnership, am I right? You know, it sounds like you're engaging a number of different stakeholders in this process, and I appreciate the point, like, it's going to be bumps, right? And we're going to have to smooth things out just like life, right? Like everything we encounter. And so I would just encourage the public and providers and families that experience this to add their voice to that, whether it's through sending testimony here or other vehicles, just so that we can understand that perspective. And so appreciate your continued kind of leadership and bringing those voices to the table.
Thank you. Thank you for your support.
I mean, I think another important example is around our homeless families. We're making a big shift in the way homeless families experience the system, bringing down a lot of the barriers, increasing the ways that homeless families can access, reducing the amount of required documentation that our homeless families may not have access to. And there's going to be a lot of questions about that. You know, we're going to be working with our schools, we'll be working with our shelters, and we'll be working within the existing crisis to really help families who can and should be accessing childcare. But that's an area where I'm sure we're not going to get it right from the start, and we're going to have to continue to kind of provide ongoing technical assistance. But I think a shared goal of making sure that we're reaching those families and recognizing that will help. So much more to come on this, I'm sure.
Any other final comments or questions on this topic before we take a quick break?
I just want to say quickly, this isn't the kind of change that like ends up on the front page of the Globe or anything. It's not like exciting to people outside of like this room probably, but it's like vitally important to the families that access the system. And so I just want to say thank you so much. It's amazing work that you've gotten done just in a few short months, and really looking forward to seeing how things continue to unfold. Thank
Like
you.
the commissioner said, it is a huge
Yeah.
team. I don't know that there's not one business unit that's not involved in this work. So everyone has been extremely supportive through my learning curve, and it will continue to be that way. Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to quickly echo the thanks. And I had goosebumps listening to what this will mean for families. So thank you to you. Thank you to the team that you're working with on this. And we're going to get this in the Globe. We're going to make a big deal.
I was like, we're going to give it a try.
Treated nicer.
Yeah.
Dignity and respect.
That's
The headline of the Globe.
The headline, dignity and respect.
It's really, really good stuff, so thank you. Thank you. All right, we will take a break. We'll reconvene about 2:15. Thank you. and turn it to the commissioner to introduce our conversation on C3.
Great. Thank you so much. So some of this will be a little bit of a repeat from the retreat where we had an opportunity to dig in. But one of the incredible things about the C3 program is the amount of insight it's given us into the broader early education and care system, really due to the high participation of programs. And so we wanted an opportunity today for the team to review with you the findings from our spring survey. And then have a chance to chat a little bit. So they're going to do a very high level, quick walkthrough, but the materials will be available online and are available to the board with an emphasis on the opportunity for you to share your key takeaways from some of the data and help the agency as we think, again, about this transition from where we are today and into the future of really thinking about a sustainable operational support for programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Jocelyn Down, Amy Checkaway, and Adrienne Murphy.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're very pleased to continue the conversation of what we're learning from C3. Just to contextualize the data that Amy and Adrienne are going to share, this is a grant that was started in the midst of the pandemic out of concerns that programs were facing a significant loss of revenue due to a loss of enrollment. And we wanted to make sure we stabilized the field. We had ARPA funds that supported us in doing that. And as part of initiating that grant, we also wanted to make sure we had mechanisms to track what was happening on the ground and how the funds were being used and were supporting programs. So we've been collecting data through the application process as well as a twice-yearly survey, and this is our opportunity to share with you what we've been hearing in the most recent survey. So I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne.
Great, thanks, Jocelyn.
I can do it? Oh, no, I can't.
The gremlins are in the room.
I broke it.
Am I just being silly?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. Great. So as Jocelyn mentioned, I'll walk through today our learnings from the Spring C3 survey. I'd be remiss also not to recognize the team behind this work, especially grateful to Anna and Michelle on our data analytics team for their work. And as the commissioner mentioned, I'm going to take a sort of speedier than usual journey through these slides, but I will stop at the end of each section, and Amy will do the same so that we can make sure that we are addressing any questions as we walk through. This slide includes just an overview of the survey, the timeline, and our response rate. We're really excited to have responses from 6,800 providers for the survey that was launched on March 31st. That's 87% of all providers, FCC and group and school age, and it's 98% of all providers who have received C3 grants who were eligible when the survey was launched. So we're really excited about the perspectives that we were able to incorporate here. We also did look at the response rates by region, and we had a response rate of over 85% of all providers in each region. And we did include here a breakdown of data by region where relevant and where the differences were notable. So we'll walk through the responses to the survey. We'll start with a few contextual slides, then some data on grant spending, and then I'll turn it over to Amy to talk through data on both staffing and family access that we gathered through the survey.
And I just want to point out that, the data from almost 7,000 programs is really almost hard to fathom. I was thinking about the very large federally funded national surveys, which have much smaller sample sizes. So I think the data we're sharing today, just because of the timing of this presentation too, is also, again, it's from almost the universe of our licensed and funded programs, which is really fabulous.
Yeah.
And huge appreciation to programs and all of the time that it takes. We are continuing to think about how to streamline the survey moving forward, recognizing that it takes time for programs to fill out, but also recognizing the data is really important for us to continue to track for program decision making.
Thanks, Amy. Before we dig into the survey data, sort of two slides of context. The first around the fact that our system-wide license capacity is continuing to rebound post-pandemic, with center-based capacity now surpassing pre-COVID levels and the FCC capacity still trending and almost back to pre-COVID levels. And in addition to license capacity, program enrollment is also continuing to stabilize, with the percent of a program's license capacity that is filled with enrolled children continuing to grow for center-based programs and continuing to remain sort of steady and stable around 83% for our family child care programs. When we start to look at the survey data, we can see that programs continue to spend the majority of their funds now at about 58% of all funds on operational costs, which is down from 65% in the survey at the same time last year. And programs are spending about 25% of grant funds, which is up from 20% at the same time last year in these investment categories and sort of more future-facing investments, which again, we think reflects a movement from sort of stabilization to longer-term sustainability. We looked at this a little bit at the retreat, but that providers have spent just over half of grant funds, 55% of all funds, on workforce compensation and supports. You can see the breakdowns by category here, but it is the sort of single biggest thematic spending category of grant funds to date. And this sort of lays out another way of cutting the slide we looked at earlier around the shift over time from program spending on operational costs to longer term investments, again, reflecting this move from stabilization to sustainability.
And also probably the stabilization of enrollment.
Yeah.
So the more that they have stable enrollment, the more they're able to use these funds to invest in other types of quality workforce initiatives, right?
Yeah, those investment categories include new staff, new benefits, and both salary increases, bonuses, sort of investments in staffing, but also investments in curricular materials and other types of quality investments. We do see that the spending categories vary by program type, with more than 42% of all center-based program spending in the existing payroll and benefits category, with while the largest single category for family child care providers is these other operational costs at 36% of grant funds. So that includes rent, utilities, mortgage, facilities maintenance, PPE, sort of the expenses that FCCs face in keeping the lights on and keeping operations running. We've looked at this over time. Another question we've asked over time is asking providers about the impact if the grant were to end, or sort of like what changes they would have to make if that grant ended. We see that programs reported that they would have to, center-based programs reported they would have to defer planned salary scale increases or benefits improvements. And then across provider types, both group and school-age providers and family child care providers reported that they would have to increase tuition, reduce program expenses, or reduce educator compensation. I think, again, demonstrating that without this grant, both educators and families would be impacted. We've looked at, but I'm not sure shared with this group, the way that this breaks down depending on the proportion of children that a provider serves that are receiving child care financial assistance. And we do see some differences on what providers report would be the impact if the grant were not available based on the percentage of children with child care financial assistance served. Providers serving lower proportion of children with CCFA would be more likely to increase tuition rates for families or to defer planned salary increases, while providers who serve a higher proportion of children receiving child care financial assistance would reported that they would be more likely to reduce educator compensation without the grant. So I think that speaks to the impact that this would have both for family affordability and for educators, especially in programs serving a high proportion of children receiving financial
You can imagine there might be a migration of those staff from one program to another if that were the impact, right?
Yeah. And then sort of zooming in on the 982 providers, which is 9% of the center-based providers that responded and 18% of the family child care providers that responded, who reported that they would close without C3 funds, that those providers represent 18,000 licensed seats and about 6,500 potential CCFA seats. So really speaking to the linkage between this funding and our system-wide license capacity. And then last but not least, we asked programs what they would prioritize if grant funding were to become permanent. As a note, we asked and deployed the survey before we knew about the C3 funding for FY24. But across provider types, providers reported that they were really interested in increasing salaries with the grant. And this is something that we saw both in response to this question and also in some of the open response and qualitative responses we got to questions throughout the survey. So I know that was sort of a whirlwind through the finance section of the grant, but happy to pause and answer any questions before passing it on to Amy.
Questions, comments?
Make sure I'm under, so this is unrestricted dollars, fully unrestricted, or it is?
Mostly.
Mostly.
How accurate, the data that we ask about how are you spending your money, knowing like unrestricted can mean you can sort of answer that anyway because you're drawing on different sources for, like what's the level of reliability we should have on the first set of slides, like the pie chart with the percentage against things? And what, you know, sort of versus other questions that might be a little more useful in understanding.
And we don't have the information about what else they're spending their money on. The questions they're answering focus on what are they doing with the grant funds. So it's more reflective of how they've choose to focus this particular investment in their larger budget, but you're right, it doesn't give us the whole picture of the budget. I think later we'll get to some places where we're looking at more of some of the outcomes, like where are salaries and what's happening
More
concretely.
Closer to
Yep.
what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Okay.
We do pre-populate, so at least the provider's responses are consistent over time. Like, you know, we sort of say, here's what you said you were spending on last time.
Has that changed?
Yeah,
Yes.
what's sort of the added piece over time?
It is
It's
cumulative over
cumulative.
time, what they're
Yeah.
reporting to us, which is also, I think, important to know when you're interpreting the
That's good.
change in percentages. You're not seeing like how much did you spend at this point versus how much you're spending at this point, but cumulatively over time, how has the overall percentage changed? So the actual time-to-time change is probably more significant than we're seeing in the
That's good to know.
change in the cumulative.
I think I'm so pleased to see the results about the family child care. I'm so pleased to see that they were represented, you know, at the rate that they were in the survey, and some of the things that they're reporting doing with the funds were just so pleased about, you know, the investments. If we're even the last slide that we're looking at, the second choice for family child care would be invest in more professional learning opportunities, which is just awesome. So I'm very, very pleased about these findings.
I think a little bit related to more, I think it's important. One thing I hear more and more as I discuss the override with legislators is that, you know, C3 is incredible, but we have to, I think the field needs to understand that there is a difference, right? Like it's, one doesn't replace the other. Rates and C3 is a different thing. You know, rates are really aimed to support vulnerable children, and programs, you know, obviously serving those children. You know, C3 is helping the sector, you know, it's helping the field get back. And then obviously this is what the survey is showing, that really it is helping the field. But in terms of rates, you know, I had to explain several times this week, you know, that's like, yes, this is an incredible investment in early childhood education, but rates need to continue because again, that is going exactly what the priority needs to be. You know, obviously everybody needs help, but we need to start with those that need the most help. Anyway, this is my own take on that. In terms of the increased tuition rates for the new, it's really interesting, the survey result on those providers that serve less than or more than 33% of subsidies. Some providers will not have the chance to increase tuition because there's 97% tuition rate is their tuition. So it's just important to make sure that all the pieces are together as we move forward with figuring out a formula, you know, and what this funding is for. I think, you know, we do need to be super appreciative and very creative with C3 because this is an incredible opportunity for everybody, but also make sure that there is a difference between both.
Yeah, I think Maria, you and I had this conversation. I think Maura and I also had this conversation. So I invite you to add your comments in as well. But
I think one of the things that C3 has helped us understand, and along with the cost study and even the increases in caseload that we're seeing as a result, I think, partly of increasing the rates, is that it's not an or strategy, it has to be an and, that we're trying to press multiple levers here, and that's what's going to take to kind of address the challenges in the childcare market, right? We need that need-based assistance, and it needs to be sufficient for families to access programs that meet their needs and the communities where they live and work. And the sector needs investment in order to exist and thrive as well. And in addition, we need to be supporting children's behavioral health, and we need to be supporting facilities. So I think we're not going to find a single funding stream that kind of can meet the needs. We're foreshadowing a little bit a conversation we're going to have when Professor Liebman arrives this afternoon to help us sort of think through, what is the broader look at sort of the childcare market and the financing structure that can support it. And I think what we're interested in is continuing to learn from the C3 data about, like, how should this dollar, this C3 dollar that looks and feels like this, be most effectively spent in collaboration with, it's not, but we recognize that it's not, it's not going to be the one-size-fits-all solution to really creating the healthy, kind of equitable structure within our early education and care system that we need.
Okay, so our C3 data also continues to really give us considerable insight into not only sort of our licensed capacity, but also staffed capacity and issues facing programs in terms of staffing, as well as workforce compensation levels. So I'm going to, again, go through quickly, but then we can pause and come back if there's any questions. A lot of the patterns remain and data remain very similar. I'll also say to the last survey, the last time point that we presented to you. I will note where there's differences. So, and a number of programs continue to report that they are still unable to serve their full license capacity. We're seeing a slightly higher proportion, so about 35% compared to about 28% of programs reporting this compared to last survey. And the majority, the sort of most common reason for being unable to serve full license capacity is because of unfilled staffing openings, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on. Relatedly, almost 20% of center-based programs are reporting at least one closed classroom. This equates to about 1,000 closed classrooms statewide, or about 8% of all classrooms. Programs that are serving kids receiving EC childcare financial assistance are also more likely to have a closed classroom than programs who are not serving this population. We see that infant and toddler classrooms are more likely to be closed compared to other age groups. And we continue to also look at the number of positions by role that are open, that programs are trying to fill statewide. So almost half of center-based programs are reporting at least one open position, and the average number of open positions is a bit over 3, which is very similar, again, to the last time point when we collected this data. And teachers make up the highest proportion of open positions compared to other roles. We are estimating there's about 2,000 open teacher positions statewide right now. We do see a little bit of improvement in the educator turnover rate. So I want to note this is program turnover, so the percent of educators that are in programs still employed compared to 12 months ago. So the turnover rate has gone down a bit, but it is still relatively high at about 26%. And we continue to see that turnover rates are fairly similar by region across the state, although the Western Massachusetts turnover rate continues to be slightly lower than the other regions. Staff turnover rates also vary based on population served, and we do see higher turnover rates in programs serving kids with childcare financial assistance compared to those who do not. And this is really just a summary slide. So again, we're seeing that programs are not able to serve their full license capacity. This is a focus on center-based programs. And the substantial majority are reporting that this is because of staffing constraints. And we asked programs how many more kids they would be able to serve if they could fill their full capacity. And that's between 10 and 16,000 kids that could be served if things were different in programs right now. So programs are reporting that it is fairly common that educators are turning down a position once they've extended an offer to them. And the most common reason reported continues to be that compensation is too low. There's a variety of other reasons, and some of them are probably related as well, as you can see here. And we are closely tracking compensation levels over time. So you will see here a continued increase in salaries since the beginning of C3. This is on average about $3 more per hour for teachers compared to the beginning of the grant, and a bit less for assistants. Compensation does remain relatively low. So this equates into the average salary for a teacher at about $45,000 per year. And just as context, 50% of state median income for a family of 3 is about $57,000. Compensation levels vary by region and also by the percent of children receiving EEC child care financial assistance. So we are seeing that the proportion of, as the proportion of kids receiving child care financial assistance goes up, the average hourly wage goes down. So I also went very fast, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments if folks have them.
I mean, Amy, a question is actually like, how would you put all this together to say something like, if we change the turnover rate to go up, like what's the sort of if-then that comes out of this data for you? Or what are the 2 or 3 potential theses?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I think, I think that programs are, again, sort of increasingly able to invest funds in raising salaries for educators. I think that's really important. Again, the compensation levels still probably have some room to grow in order to be competitive, which we are seeing in the turnover rates. We know that high turnover rates are not good for kids or good for programs. So that definitely jumps out as well. And I think, yeah, those are sort of the main takeaways for me. I don't know if others have other comments.
I think it does seem to me that compensation is a linchpin here. That there's a lot of evidence. It makes sense pragmatically, and there's a lot of evidence from what we see in the survey that the compensation is a key tool that programs do have to address the staffing shortage. It's probably not the only tool. I think that there are other things that we can do as well. But that staffing crisis is one of the bigger challenges that programs are facing right now, and it's affecting everything that we're looking at in this data.
And sorry, one follow-up on this
that's-
is like, does this data or other data give us a sense of what's the threshold compensation at which point we're going to start moving the?
That feels like that's the big question for us to try to
Okay,
take on.
so I'm good at asking
Yeah.
the questions, but not
You
getting
are.
the answers.
Given the size of the C3 grants, though, I mean, that can't really be the mechanism for increasing salaries. Right, I mean, the
Question,
magnitude of the
if
C3 grants isn't big enough to really raise salaries.
If the salaries only need to be raised by 3%, the math might add up, or I don't know, that's the question.
Yeah,
that-
yeah,
how
I guess
much
that's
to
the big
raise,
question is like,
you know?
would C3 grants, were they made permanent, be sufficient to push salaries further upward to a point that would be meaningful?
Yeah, I mean, that feels like we can do part of that mathematical exercise to sort of figure out what current levels of C3 could cover in terms of increases. I think the other piece that is important, particularly in looking at this, that change over time is also happening at a point in time when enrollment is increasing, so tuition revenues are also increasing. So sort of understanding where the C3 funds fits in the larger context of budget, back to your earlier question, Maura, is also an important consideration. And that's, I think, also partly the connection to the subsidy piece.
Right, subsidies also increased during this time.
That has to be part of the picture.
And that's a
Also,
bigger
One of the
infusion.
reasons that you listed that they couldn't serve their full capacity was health and safety reasons. It's small, but do you have a sense of what that is? Is that related to COVID, or are there other issues?
The way I interpreted it is that it may be perhaps due to parent concerns about health and safety and sort of related enrollment. Maybe, not as many kids enrolling, but there could be other things in there.
The other thing we heard during the pandemic is, for a while, programs were required to reduce class sizes, but also many of them chose, particularly in the height of the pandemic, to maintain smaller class sizes. And some programs do report that they've continued to do that as a best practice.
And some parents are obviously still concerned about that. And the centers can be as well.
Sure.
I didn't know if there was something in addition to COVID.
That's a good question.
I mean, I do think to those points, to the earlier points about what'll be interesting this year to me is this is the first full year of committed funding, right? And what will that do to some of those percentages and allocations where people may feel more comfortable putting it into salary where they weren't before because you were kind of working in these 3 to 6 month chunks of funding, which is very unstable. And so it's great to have this kind of baseline to really see from going from where this started, where you started, Jocelyn, on the inception of this program to kind of stability and to kind of just foundational funding. And now that we've brought some stability to it this year, how does that story change over time as well?
Yeah, and that was a common theme in some of the open response questions where providers expressing exactly that is, I would like to spend this in certain ways if I had more certainty around the longer term, the longevity. So.
This is somewhat related, but I want to just give credit to the commissioner on what she said initially, reporting that teachers or early educators will be able to have days off during the holidays, and that's somewhat on an equalizer with regards to district's schedule, and I do see teachers staying, just knowing that I am going to have that week off and it's going to be paid, and some programs will decide that they're not going to take away vacation time from you. Like, programs have a flexibility to use that as a retaining tool, and I think it's hard to appreciate unless you're in the field how important that is and what an impact that has. So thank you.
And I think, Maria, we've talked about this from the very first time I visited your program, which is that, we have a lot of early educators who are choosing to be in this field and want to stay in the field. And so compensation is really essential, but feeling valued and the other parts of connection so things like time off. It seems like a small thing to us, but being able to count on that time off with their family is, I did get an email after we announced the holiday closures saying that it was an important recruitment and retention tool to allow people to say you will have that holiday time off and you will be paid for it. So I think in addition to looking at the combination of compensation, that the benefit package and the values and connection people feel to their employers is part of it too.
So the slide that just is the overall averages of salaries increased in 2 years. If you look at the center-based teacher midpoint, that's a 15% increase in salary in a 2-year period. So I agree they're still low, and yet there is something I think it's just worth saying that that's pretty great as and I guess maybe, and then this 15% increase can be attributed to fill in the blank. What, like?
Are you asking?
What?
Right.
Yeah, I'm like, what, so, is there sort of a direct line between what C3, how would you
I don't think we can
connect this
map
data?
that to be fair to our data. I think, again, this is happening at a point in time where programs had some additional funding. They also had significant staffing pressures that also puts an upward pressure on salaries. So it was probably a combination of all of those things supporting this type of change.
Like, what other sector has staff that compensation rates that have grown to 15% in 2 years?
But,
I know it started at a very, very low point.
It was like
clear.
a long time.
I get it.
50% on a low. Well, I think that And this is causing turnover rates too, which is that a lot of the other low wage, I think employers are feeling that same upward
everybody
pressure,
else.
whether it's
Okay, so
the
that's-
service industry or retail, and those are can be our competition for staff, which is not what we want for our staff. We want them to choose early education and feel like it's a career pathway they can be on, and they can have professional advancement and increases in salaries. So. But I think a lot of industries have felt upward pressure and competition for employees. And so, part of, we would love to be able to draw a direct line with C3, and maybe that's part of where the future leads us with C3. It's certainly having an impact on their ability to retain staff and to pay wages that are more competitive.
Quick question. Maybe it's not quick, so forgive me if I open up a can of worms. But do we, and this is just purely, this is curiosity and me trying to make sense of all the data. So I know that about 85% on average of folks have filled out the survey, right? I think it is the folks that have received this money that have had to. Do we have a sense of those, of the profile of those who haven't filled out the data? I think you were trying to talk about it earlier, but I wasn't hearing very well. But do we have any sense of that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that has actually come up multiple times. I think that we have done a bit of looking at the sort of profile of programs and have not seen any clear patterns yet. We looked at everything from how long a program had been open to various sort of the demographic characteristics that we can, program type. I think there were.
I think the only thing that
Yeah.
that providers that serve children in child care financial assistance are
Much more
heavily represented
Yeah.
in the C3 grant. So there were more providers who had not responded that do not serve children with child care financial assistance, but that was the only characteristic that was particularly notable.
And do we think the same people within all of that are responding to the survey month over month or however often they have to complete? Or is it different range? I mean, again, we may not know, but do we have a sense?
Yeah, and this survey data really actually includes everybody who participated in C3 because it's sort of a requirement essentially in order to
It is a
receive the
requirement.
funds. Yes.
That's great. Right, but then, so there's 88%.
And the other percent are programs that are not receiving C3,
Okay, so
basically.
okay.
But it is a good question to continue to keep an eye on who's not participating in C3 and understanding why that is. So I just have a couple more data slides, really from the family perspective. So we asked programs, we've been asking them over time if they have their own wait lists for enrollment, and continue to see that program wait lists are more common among center-based providers and for programs with a smaller percent of children who are receiving financial assistance. The proportion of programs with wait lists is highest in the Southeast and in Western Mass, which is consistent with prior survey data. We also asked about the length of the wait list and did see sort of notable decreases in the numbers of kids on wait lists that programs were reporting at this time point, which is good news. And finally, we asked the extent to which C3 funds have sort of positively or have allowed programs to address program affordability, and see that a significant number of programs report that it has enabled them to help with affordability, in particular by delaying tuition increases, reducing other fees, and also in some cases providing private scholarships, both for families and for staff. So I think that ends the data part.
Without you asking Amy
Yes.
to put it together, I think partly in looking at the data, I think what we're seeing is the investments happening in the places we would like to see them happening, into workforce compensation, into quality and curriculum, Stephanie, as you, especially for family childcare, without having to pass that cost on to families. That's sort of how we read a little bit the data together, or we hope that's what the data is telling us.
And we've heard that that is particularly true, and I think that showed up in some focus groups we did too for family child care providers who are, really trying not to pass the burden along to the families who they're serving, who are often the most vulnerable.
When we get the fall survey data, when are we going to see that?
Probably early 2024.
We have to wait that long. Okay. It would be helpful to see, I think we've got enough data points for trend lines on all of these. Can we do that so that we can look at all
over
these
time.
against a timeline? Okay, that would be helpful.
So in just quickly updating you all on our planning for FY24 and 25, we are continuing to look at this data to talk about what we're learning, and we'll move into a discussion and get your feedbacks and reflections on implications of this. But looking at the levers we have through C3 and thinking about the extent to which we're pulling them in the right ways at this point in time, or if there are adjustments that we need to make to further, sort of focus funding on the issues that are coming to the fore right now. One is the grant formula. I think everybody's familiar with the fact that that was designed to support, be adjusted for the program size, the number of staff a program has, whether the program is located in a higher SBI community with a higher social vulnerability index, or a program that's serving a significant number of children with subsidies. But that is something that we can look at and think about, is it functioning the way we need it to right now? We have the data collection. We will continue to collect data and continue to look at ways based on the priorities of the grant as we move forward. And we do have eligibility requirements at this point. It's a very open grant. I mean, really, you have to be open and serving children and be part of our licensor-funded system. But at the same time, and I think the evidence suggests that broad-based approach is important, but that is a mechanism that we can think about in terms of the alignment of what's happening with the goals that we have. So looking ahead, in FY24, our focus is on the data and the analysis that we need to do to think about where this could go. We'll continue to gather and talk about data that we have and, thoughts about what would be useful or really helpful at this point in time. We are planning for the fall survey, so we, input into points that seem really important from the data that we have or that you'd like to see. We can do something with that information right now. And then looking ahead to using that data to inform decisions for FY25 that can be folded into ongoing conversations as the budget is planned in this fiscal year for next fiscal year. We've had a lot of discussion, but it would be really great to also hear, sort of having marinated in this for a little while, we've now had 2 meetings when we've been talking about this back to back. Are there key takeaways that you think we should be paying attention to after seeing this data, and any specific considerations that we should make sure the program addresses or takes into account when we think about this transition from emergency stabilization to this ongoing operational support phase that we're moving into?
I have a few thoughts. First of which is the goal when C3 was created was stabilization, right? We knew that we were in the middle of this kind of historic change and we needed to really stabilize or else, and we did that, and that was successful. And I think that the grant formula that we came up with was really successful. We've seen in previous data that we have really good diversity of the types of folks who are able to take advantage of it, good representation of folks for whom English is their second language, and good representation from folks who are serving high vulnerability. So I think that the grant formula we came up with, it worked, it did its job. Mm-hmm. And I think that as we move to the next phase, the question is, what are we trying to do with that next phase? What is the goal of that next phase? And how do we make a grant formula that will achieve that goal? Mm-hmm. For me, personally, I'm the parent representative on this board, and representing the voice of parents in the Commonwealth, I would hope that one of the things that we could focus on for the C3 grants is really driving down costs for families. We are the most expensive childcare in the nation. It is untenable for parents out there. And we know that our subsidies are only serving a small percentage of the children that actually need assistance, whose families cannot afford care. And even if you don't technically qualify for those, I personally, if I didn't just get a pre-K spot for my child, would be paying $42,000 in childcare this year, which is just an insane amount of money. And if you think about how many women that kind of takes out of the workforce because they make that very logical financial decision of I'm not making enough to pay for my childcare. And so I think that as we look at the grant formula, weighing perhaps those either family childcares or group childcares that can keep their costs for parents lower, and providing them more funding to sort of fill that gap. I think I would hope that could be something that we could focus on for the future of these funds.
A quick thought on that, I'm going to push a little bit just because it's a matter of priority. I think there's a lot of need, right? So I am going to. I just feel like there is evidence that there is still a lot of need at the eligibility level, like children that should be actually receiving subsidies that are not. And obviously, we are getting there with the subsidy regulations. With we want to make sure that we. That those children being served actually are served by funds, by this formula as well. That's where, that priority actually, it's where do we start, right? Like there's a lot of levels of needs, but what is the level of need that we need to start with in order to continue moving up? So, because I agree with you. I mean, obviously, there's a need to make it more affordable for families as well, but we have to keep every need in plain view and figure out, okay, who some are drowning, some are already underwater, some are, we gotta bring everybody up, and we have to start somewhere. So priority is going to be important here.
I'll throw another. I mean, this is the challenge that we have, is to prioritize among very important things. One thought that I don't see here, and I'm curious in your planning if you're going to do, is that meeting we had about quality and what the research says about quality. I'm wondering if you're planning any questions related to what research says leads to high quality, to gather that as baseline this year, because I think that yet is another priority, is affordability, access and quality. So is that a part of the plan? Or that's, please ask questions related to quality.
Thank you for that.
Is there a curriculum? Do you use a curriculum? Yes, no? Like, there's light ways to do it too, or whatever, yeah.
I mean, I keep thinking like, okay, so yes, you get a lot of really good data through a survey. I just feel like, programs serving different children are going to use it differently. For example, I mean, I will use examples of programs serving, because again, I have direct experience with that. High numbers of subsidized children. Those children, are usually in communities that have partnership with districts, but the districts have the same capacity issues as the programs and the same challenges as the programs. So obviously, the programs have to spend a higher amount of resources in serving those children. There is no option of like, oh, this child belongs to the district, or they need to receive services at the professional development center, or here or there. They really need to be served by the child care center or the child care program. So there is a higher level of funding goes towards the children, that are subsidized, needs to go towards the children that are subsidized, because they need higher services and they have less options. So I just, in reading the data from these surveys, it just makes me think of that. It's like, okay, yes, we are spending very similar, in very similar ways, but some of the ways in which we are using it are directly impacting children more than others. I don't know if I'm explaining myself well, but it's just like when you serve different children, it just serves them differently, and some are higher needs than others. So I mean, that's the bottom line. And I'm sorry, I'm not finding the right words to express this.
Can I ask you, because I want to make sure I'm following. So I think are you suggesting we should be seriously thinking about the grant form, the changes to the grant formula, to make sure we're more equitably serving?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think we should think of that.
That's where that. Okay, that's what.
But I think continuing to think of that, because I think that the survey reveals that we're spending money in similar ways, regardless of the children that we serve. In some ways, not. But most ways, yes, it's really staff benefits, you know, but how is it impacting the children? You know, like, yes, we are all spending money in terms of retaining staff and personnel and benefits, but how does that impact the children that you're serving? Because again, when the children have higher needs, they are benefiting at a much higher rate than when the children don't have the same level of need. Again, some programs have the option of working with the district or saying like this, it's not the right program for you, but again, in some communities, that's the only option they have.
The only thing I would say is just so echo the themes of affordability, equality, and livable wages for educators. The balance of all that is the key in my mind to trying to get this right. The other thing I would say is, and we didn't get to explore it as much, and I want to get my head into it a little bit more, but the family child care providers and center-based, there are some key differences there that I think are worth exploring and looking at more closely. Yeah, so those are my thoughts.
Right, the way an independent business might spend it versus an employer who has staff. And the program has been designed to be sort of flexible funds and same set of standards and rules. And so thinking about family child care versus center-based in a more nuanced way going forward. Yeah.
And I want to go on the record saying that I support the flexibility of the funds. I
Yeah.
think that, you know, trying to get into determining how you can use funds is a really tricky place to be. And I come at this from a nonprofit where I'm constantly being told what I can spend my money on. But it's just a really bad way to force people to work. And people, like Maria's saying, different kids need different things. And the provider knows that, and they know what they need. And it's not up to us to determine for them what the best use of their funds are. It's up to them. It's my personal opinion on that.
Well, I mean, I agree with both points, right? Is that we need to make, to the extent we can, make things more affordable for families because the cost is, it's an incredible burden. But at the same time, we also need to hire more people in the field so that that capacity overall can increase. And so, you know, there are polar opposites there in terms of what you can do. And so it's a struggle, but it's not unique to this field either, right? We're seeing the same things in K-12. We're seeing things in the adult world as far as direct care providers. It's, you know, it's just across everywhere. And I don't know where all the people went, but, you know, that's definitely a shared issue that obviously, you know, people are working on, but it's going to take time.
I'm reflecting on the arc of this conversation from when we started our meeting today to our next presenter when we talk a little bit about this deeper. But, you know, historic investment, caseload back to pre-COVID levels, but yet still a lot of work to do, right? About how we do and Maria, you mentioned rates earlier, and like it is an and, it's not an either or, and how do we kind of use the levers that we have to address the access, the affordability, and the quality in a really complicated world, right? Small businesses, nonprofits, family child care center. I mean, it's just there's a lot of different profiles of providers out there serving children and families, and how do we, you know, come to some consensus to help serve them the best that we can. I was thinking about Tyrese's presentation, like about that user experience, that time with the family, about how they access this system, because that's really what we're here to do. And so I'm just grateful for the conversation, and really grateful to all the 88% of the providers that are taking the time to provide this data, because I couldn't imagine having this conversation or being in this position today to even be having this conversation about how to improve it if we did not have this information. And so I know we ask a lot of our providers, but this is really informative information as we think about what the future financing model looks like here in the Commonwealth. And so really important kind of a step for providers to be partnering with us in service of that. So grateful to everybody for helping us do that.
I think it demonstrates a true partnership and willingness to partner, right? Because I do know sort of on the, in the health and human services world, when we're trying to find out information about programs and get data, the responses are not nearly what they are here. And so you obviously make better informed decisions when you have data that shows you what the real need is. So kudos to the field for participating, whether it was required or not. That doesn't actually always drive the outcome, right? And so they actually have demonstrated a true partnership with us, which is incredible.
I agree, and I think the team that's been built here, I think it's important for everyone to know. I think, data is the data that and information that providers are giving us is helping to shape policy and decision making, right? It's not just collecting data. You can see it in this conversation. We saw it at the retreat conversation. You can see it in the stakeholder engagement on the regulatory reforms. Like, it is a really important piece of this puzzle right now, and so I'm grateful for everybody for participating.
Just reiterate that. I came back from a program visit out on the Cape where I had met with a provider, and I said to her, we recognize how difficult it is to each month and then twice a year to be providing this level of data. And she said, it is really hard, but I see the agency using it to inform the work you're doing, so that makes me feel better about submitting it. So, and I called Amy right away to tell her. I was like, they see it. So, yes. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you, board members, for your comments and your thoughts. And excellent segue to the next conversation. I think I can do it myself. So thank you all. And as they said, there's a team behind them. So we have a lot of interesting questions ahead around C3. But as most of you are aware, we've been thinking both about C3, but about the system in general, studying the cost of care, reforming rates. And I am so grateful to have the opportunity to introduce you to Jeff Liebman, who is the Robert W. Scrivener Professor of Public Policy at Harvard Kennedy School. He teaches courses in social policy, public sector economics, tax policy, budget policy, social insurance. He runs the Harvard Kennedy Government Performance Lab, which provides pro bono assistance to state and local governments. I've personally, in my role in state government, had the opportunity to be the beneficiary of the talent that Jeff cultivates at Harvard Kennedy School in forming a number of different projects and programs. Most recently, we worked on the Food Security Task Force during the height of COVID, where they provided an incredible analytic and sort of how to make government work better experience. He is served early in the Obama administration as chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget, and as a senior advisor on economics directly to the president on healthcare and other economic issues. And we are so fortunate to have him here to be talking. He also runs the Rappaport. There's too many things. Taubman Center, the Rappaport, but the commitment to sort of make government work better at the state and local level, and to use economics to drive thinking about how public sector, a big role in the Affordable Care Act. And we have a very similar set of questions happening in the child care market right now. So big questions about how should this sector be organized? How do we make sure that we're balancing all the things that we are struggling with today? And how do we weave together the various funding that's in the system, or understand what's missing from that funding? So how does each dollar make sense? And what does that look like in the context of sort of the economics of this market in general? So we are very fortunate that the Rappaport Institute is taking on these big, hairy questions. And I said to Jeff, I said it might sound strange, but I'm just so relieved sharing the burden of these questions with you. And so we've had an opportunity, and most importantly, like all good relationships start, our children went to preschool together, so we have known each other for a long time, and I am just incredibly grateful that you're here and that the Rappaport Institute is taking on this project, and the agency and the board really looks forward to hearing about how you all are organizing this work and learning from you in partnership.
Great. Thank you so much, and I guess I just want to say I'm equally grateful to you and to the secretary and the chair and all the members of the committee, because we only get to do interesting work when there's real leadership in state government, and so it's that's a necessary condition for us to get to do the kind of things we do as well. So as Commissioner Kershaw said, I'm an economics professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, where I direct the Rappaport Institute for Greater Boston, and I'm joined here today with my colleague Catherine Carlson, who is the Rappaport Institute's executive director. The mission of the Rappaport Institute is to improve governance in the Greater Boston area by strengthening connections among the region's scholars, students, and civic leaders. And what that means in practice is that we basically do three things. We fund fellowships for graduate students at Massachusetts colleges and universities so that they can spend their summers working in city or state government with the hope of launching them on public sector careers. We perform matchmaking services. For example, we'll hear that an agency has some policy problem they would like answered, and we'll help them figure out what professor at what local college or university can help them do that analysis, or the other direction, we may have a professor who has some question they want to get involved in, but they don't have the connections in government. And so we do that kind of matchmaking. And then the third thing we do is we get directly involved in research when there's an opportunity for us to be helpful in the policy conversation. And what I'm here to talk about today fits in that third category. So I worked on the Affordable Care Act, both as a policy advisor on the 2007-2008 Obama presidential campaign, and then at the White House Office of Management and Budget, and then during the first 2 years of the Obama administration. And of course, the origins of the ACA was Massachusetts deciding that it was not going to sit around and wait for Washington to act. It was going to solve the health insurance problem here. And then, of course, the Massachusetts Romney Care solution became the national solution. And I know it sounds a little grandiose to say this, but there's really no reason why Massachusetts can't do the same thing on early childhood education and care that it did for health insurance. And while I certainly hope that a national solution emerges, because I care about the future of children everywhere and not just here at home, it may actually be better for Massachusetts if we meet the challenge on our own, because if the federal government, we're a high-income state, and so if the federal government taxes everyone to then do a lot of spending across the nation, we're going to pay more than our share and get less than our share. Whereas if we just come up and tax ourselves to solve the problem, we'll actually come out better. And so, again, I hope we get a national solution, but there's really it's almost easier to do it on our own. My reading of the situation in Massachusetts right now is that there's quite a lot of commitment among our elected officials, among our business leaders, among community advocates about actually coming up with a path to high quality care that is equitable and accessible to everyone. And I would say, along with that, investing sufficiently in the provider workforce to get the quality care and to treat those folks right as well. And we see that commitment, just as we were talking about in the previous session, with the Commonwealth's intention to continue the C3 program, even as the federal dollars are reduced. And so as we think about taking the big steps we seem to be on the verge of taking in terms of additional state investments, it would be ideal if those steps were on a direct line toward whatever the ultimate end game is, where care is accessible to all, so that on the way there we don't have to sort of take a detour that needs to be retraced, and instead we're heading in the right direction. And so what I'm hoping comes out of this study is that we provide one or maybe several visions of what a policy endgame could be, where we truly had accessible care for all, and that would make it easier for all of you to say, in the steps we're taking in the short term, we're heading in that direction. So that's basically the idea here, and we're looking forward to digging deeply into the data, to consulting widely with all of you and other experts and stakeholders, and ultimately to producing a report sometime in 2024. Let me say a little more about the substance, I think, of getting from here to there. From the initial stages of my work, I'm seeing three categories of hard challenges that need to be sorted out in order to construct a comprehensive system where every family has access to high-quality care. The first type of challenge is ones where I don't think it's clear what the right technical solution is right now. And some examples I would put in that category are, what's the best way to raise the wages of childcare workers? Should we simply give more resources to providers and hope they pass that along as higher wages? Should we set minimum wages for providers in exchange for accepting state resources? Should we provide wage subsidies directly to the providers, in an earned income tax credit like way? I think it's unclear what the best way is at the moment to accomplish that. And similarly, if we want to help raise the skill level of childcare workers and set them on a path to rising wages over their careers, what is the best way to do that? Again, I think that's a pretty hard question where I don't think there is an obvious best solution, at least not to me, of what we need to do there. And I would put on that category also, if the state is going to be providing a lot more comprehensive funding, how do we do it on a way that builds on our existing providers, is highly additive, and doesn't cause other current funders like businesses and city governments and higher income parents to significantly reduce their contributions, thereby driving up the cost to the state budget of whatever the progress is toward a more comprehensive solution. So for this category of challenges, I hope our report will provide clarity of thinking about the trade-offs and possibly some new options that aren't currently being considered. The second category of challenges are ones where I think the technical aspects aren't really that hard or novel, but there's some hard choices that our elected decision makers need to make. I would put into that category, should early education and care be provided for free like K-12 education is, or should it look more like health insurance where it's free for a substantial number of families, but then we're expecting middle and higher income families to be paying some fraction of income, 7% or 10% or something like that, toward care, and what should that percentage of income be? I think another example in that category would be, if we're going to pay for this, what should be the mix of payroll taxes, state sales taxes, income taxes, or local revenue sources like the property tax? So for this category of challenges, we hope we can simply lay out the options along with their implications and budget costs so that those who've been elected, or I guess appointed by the elected officials to make decisions can make their decisions. The third kind of challenge I'm seeing in this space are issues where I guess I would say the issues are fraught, not because of anything technical or hard, but because issues in this policy space are analogous to other ideological debates about the role of government or around who is deserving of public assistance. A question in that category would be, should families be allowed to use state funding to pay a portion of costs at centers that set prices above the state standard? For example, centers that charge high prices to families who have the means to pay for the highest quality care. Or another question, I guess, in that category would be, should subsidies be available, let's say, during the first year of a child's life to parents who choose to stay home and care for their own children? And so for this category of challenges, I think we mostly hope that we can take advantage of the fact that we are researchers not directly involved in the political system, and be able to explain and talk about some of these issues in ways that may be harder for people who are more closer to the political process to discuss. So that's our current thinking, and we're really looking forward to collaborating with EEC and with this board and with other stakeholders as this research project gets underway. And I also want to acknowledge the Commonwealth Children's Fund, represented by Melora Belson today, who's been generously engaging with us about funding this research project. So I would love to hear your feedback about anything I said, but particularly I'd love your feedback on the question of where are there difficult issues where you think an economist like me could actually be helpful in figuring out the options and the trade-offs.
Let's open up for a conversation.
Where do we start?
No.
Thrilled you're doing this. So one dimension that has been on my mind, I think in a lot of our minds, is universal pre-K, which is a big priority, and projecting that out as part of this formula. I think that's we've just never really wrapped our heads around that, and I think it's only going to grow. So that would be one, the impact of public pre-K on the market, and obviously the infant toddler and like all of that.
Because of the cross subsidies between basically undercharging for the early years and overcharging in those years and making the whole thing work.
Yeah. The second one, which may be out of scope, but I always like to think economists can come up with answers for any problem. So we have abysmally low reading levels in our state. So third grade reading, so the fact that what EEC covers is like early childhood and after school, kids and after school programs up through age 12. So getting DESE in the mix and this is not about dollars and cents, or I guess I just want to put it out there to say, like, when we talk about quality and the governor's commitment to addressing the literacy problems in our state, like, is there any way to incorporate an economic perspective on how you get all of these different agencies working in concert towards growing our performance in literacy?
And is your guess that the challenge there is half things that happen early in life and then half things that are happening in the area that I would call outside the scope of this report, but like between ages 5 and 12?
Yeah, and maybe, I think our group might, maybe more than half early in life. Yes, it is sort of the role of our society before you arrive in kindergarten and then when you're in kindergarten through 3rd, 4th grade, children are going to after-school programs too that are in our domain. So there's also this sort of movement to have extended learning time, and we have that. So again, this may be way out of the scope of an economist view.
Think about it like the journey of the student, not so much the system.
Child.
Right? Like the child goes to early education, then we hand off to DESE, but we oversee the out-of-school time. Like it becomes, if we just think about it as the journey of the student through 0 to college, it's these handoffs in the system that might have some.
And that could be obviously
inefficiencies.
way out of scope, but it's just like, it's a thorny problem that maybe you'd be excited to figure out how to solve.
Other thoughts?
Right, Secretary?
How about it?
Other thoughts from the board?
I'm really extremely excited to hear about what you're going to be studying and really look forward to hearing more as the work continues. And I have to say, I'm really happy to hear you mention giving subsidies directly to parents, especially during the first year of life. It has never made sense to me that we will pay a program $350 a week to take care of an infant, but we will not just give it to the parent who can care for that child better. And I think that it's a question that sort of needs to be asked from an economic perspective, sort of like, what are we doing here? And how are we setting children up to have the best outcomes later in life? We know that those early years are so key in brain development and setting the foundation for future success. And just really looking, stripping back, like you said, all of the thoughts about who's deserving of support and who's not, and just saying what would really make sense for our state, preparing children the best way for their futures. And so I was really happy to hear you mention that. It's something I've had sort of in my craw for years. That's great. So, yeah.
So, for one thing, I liked all the ideas that you proposed already. Can't we have all of them? But I'm also interested in knowing, can we, one of the things that's an important question to me is sort of making sure that the people on the lower end of the income spectrum are being served as best they can and have as much access as possible. So as you're approaching this and doing different questions, I'm wondering if we can have some type of analysis or study that gives us sort of a cost benefit for making such investments towards that lower end of the income spectrum versus making investments across the spectrum. I think that will be helpful for us in terms of, what our goal and our charge is with this program.
And that reinforces something that the vice chair said earlier about the cost may actually be higher to serve some of the people who have greater needs. It's not just about giving equal resources to everyone. That we may need to spend more on average for people who have other challenges in their lives.
I had the same,
Yeah.
in the same vein, a similar suggestion in terms of like, what is the impact of the different models in equity? You know, universal pre-K, you know, like, does that impact equity? Really, it impacts everybody, but does it impact everybody equally?
And just on this thread, like, how might we think about the importance of universality in service of equity? So, actually, is there some numerical way of thinking about why universal is going to actually ultimately be the best solution to serve the highest? You're looking unsure about that. Yeah.
I look like that because it is my understanding from all my reading that oftentimes when we do have universal programs, it actually doesn't benefit the kids on the lower end of the spectrum the way ideally we would want it to. So, yeah, that's why I asked for the cost.
And that's the question I have. I'd love to just, maybe that's already a proven answer, but I guess
No, that's why I asked them for the cost analysis.
Okay, same here, okay.
I mean, I think there are a couple of different issues here. One is if you have a fixed budget, you got to choose where you're spending it, and if you spread it over everyone, that may mean you're not targeting the lowest income as much. But there's, I think, a second issue of sometimes more universal programs build political constituencies that end up being stronger and you know, more higher quality, and so but you know, there can be dynamics like that as well. But I think thinking through all these issues, I think, is really, really important.
So kind of similar thread, but different stakeholder. Do you think it's possible to frame the issues of affordability, access, quality, as an economic ability, et cetera, et cetera? Can you frame it as one overall economic development case, or is that too complicated, gets murky as you think about the differentiation of the business community?
A good question. I'm not sure I've thought about that yet, but my guess is it's a little easier to think of this as a aggregate, you know, how many more people might be in the workforce if we had more accessible childcare. And then I'm not sure I will get to the stage where I can tell you exactly how many of them would end up working in different sectors, or, you know, I think that's a hard, I mean, I guess one could, I guess in principle, one could look at data on who has left the workforce after they had, let's say, a first child, and what industries and occupations did they exit from. And so that might be able to give us a sense of if there were, I mean, it wouldn't tell you for sure what the counterfactual would be, but it might give you a sense of which industries or which size employers might see the biggest expansion in labor supply if we had broader access to care.
I have a question that's more for Commissioner Kershaw connected to this. So the cost study and the alternative methodology, do you see a place for Professor Liebman's research to help us with that? Because we're trying to negotiate the alternative methodologies. Do you see a place for that? And I'm asking you because I don't know enough about it to really say.
Yeah.
So be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we provided the costs, you know, to the cost study and information, and I think we're going to be able to move ahead on the alternative methodology, which is associated with how we set rates for child care financial assistance reimbursement. So, I mean, maybe the question is more for Professor Liebman too, which is sort of, I think the question for us is, how do we understand the actual cost of care relative to how we're funding programs, and what the role of subsidy is versus some other dollar that's in the system, whether it's our C3 dollars and others. So I think the landscape in which we're deciding to move to an alternative methodology away from a market rate survey to understand what costs are, but also focus on what it means for access for families. I think it's the context in which Professor Liebman will be doing his work. While we pursue our alternative methodology and get approval from the federal government to do that, which we are anticipating proceeding with. But I believe we've shared the cost study with you and your team for review. And
So then for Professor Liebman, and I don't know if you've really had a chance to explore that cost study, but if you have, what have you thought about in terms of the research and how we move this work forward in the field?
I'm not sure I'm ready to. Research is really just starting, so I don't want to guess where it's going to come out. But I do think an important component is to understand all the flows right now that are adding up to how we're paying for care, both to just see how you build on that, but also to make sure we don't crowd out too many of those. Because again, if we're going to expand, we'd sort of like to be able to expand in a way that's as low pain as possible to the state budget. You know, you don't want to buy out the things that are already paying for the system.
Can I ask another idea for questions? So I'm wondering, do we have really good data in the state about where our childcare deserts are, and whether or not we could couple some like GIS mapping on some of the analyses that you're doing? Because I think it's really important for us to understand where we need to bulk up, you know, in terms of the supply.
That's definitely part of what we're thinking about. The department has already done a lot of that. So I don't have to, luckily, I think, invent that from scratch, but I think I can I'm going to be able to use the modeling they've already done to inform this. And I think, you know, so I think what's really hard is figuring out in different parts of the state the right set of different rates. And I know that's something that comes into this, what we've just been talking about in terms of the alternative cost formulas, and you know, trying to understand where the differences in costs are because of differences in the labor market, where it's because there's different needs, you know, for children. And I think that's a really hard thing, and it's a whole other set of equity debates that are difficult.
Can I add one nuance to that? Because I agree that that a lot of our data looks at it sort of across the state, but I actually want to know sort of, I mean, we can still do it, you know, across the state, but I want to know about poverty level, right? Specifically in terms of, you know, different pockets of poverty sort of across the, you know, the state.
I just meant, so, you know, where there's sort of the research that Professor Liebman and his team are going to do, and then like EDC sort of studying of the system. And we have we have a project underway that's been looking at sort of childcare deserts, at least for formal care. And we will be able to present that data, and sort of the relationship is we're like, whatever data you need that we have, we're happy to provide that to inform the research, and as we continue to sort of study the system and try and fix the cogs that are in our control. Yeah.
Any other comments?
I guess what I'm wondering is, so is this, the output of this going to be kind of blue sky? I mean, it's obviously going to start from what we have to work with, but some really creative ideas that both have an economic lens and an argument for what kind of a political strategy, like sort of a political value as well as an economic value? Or is that going to be us to draw that out, you know, like to think about how this actually can hold some of your amazing
I guess the way I would say it is, I'm not going to give you advice on political strategy. That's not what I'm trained to do, and not my role here. But I'll tell you a story. When I was early in my career, and just 2 years into my career as an assistant professor, I got asked to go work in Washington for the first time, and I sat down and asked, I had a colleague, Richard Darman, who had been OMB director under Bush, and I asked if I could have lunch with him to get advice, because I didn't know anything about functioning in government, and so he nicely had lunch with me, and I said, so what advice do you have for you know, the role I'm about to play on Social Security reform? And he took out a piece of paper, and he drew a little rectangle on it. And he said, you know, you could imagine the policy space of Social Security being this whole page, but you can already predict that the deal that's going to get done is in that rectangle. And you should become the biggest expert in Washington on everything in that rectangle. And I guess what I would say is, maybe I'll go a little bit broader than what I'm guessing the rectangle is, but I'm going to try to produce something that's actually relevant to where we can all see this going. So that's my answer, I think.
And I want to acknowledge and just say thank you, because I know this research project is being independently funded through philanthropy, and appreciate the Commonwealth Children's Fund commitment to this. And I think it speaks to one of your first comments about the level of partnership and commitment across multiple stakeholder groups on this particular issue today, right now. And so grateful for just engaging us in this conversation, because that's what I think will help us stay in that small box, which will help hopefully give us some lessons learned and some guidance about ways to do the rest of the work, right? And so really, really appreciative of that level of partnership that this project is bringing for something that is a little bit outside the scope of the department, but really important to the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm looking forward to working with all of you on over the next year.
any other comments?
A fast question, when in 24 are you expecting?
I knew someone was going to ask that, and I very deliberately didn't make a commitment. Yeah, I hate over-promising and under-delivering, so let's just say 2024 for the moment, but I will be, if you tell me where what the legislature is up to, I will try to be relevant.
Thank you so much, Professor Liebman, and I know you're joined by Catherine Carlson, the Executive Director of the Rappaport Institute, so thank you for... No, take care for today, and we look forward to hearing how the research evolves and to partnering with you and supporting in any way we can, so grateful very much. All right. No?
All right, thank you. Thank you to the board for your participation today. That concludes our meeting. I would like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting. I'm going to do this differently now. I got permission. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I don't have to do a roll call. Motion passes, meeting adjourned.